The waiting room was cold, too bright, and far too quiet. I sat with my hands folded over a manila folder, knuckles white around the edges. Inside were printouts, charts, handwritten notes, and 5 years of quiet desperation turned into data. My legs tingled again, just like they had that morning, pins and needles climbing from my toes up past my knees. I didn't move. I just watched the door. When it opened and they called my name, I stood slowly. I was used to standing slowly now. Dr. Melissa Chen welcomed me with the kind of presence that didn't need to raise its voice. She didn't ask me how I was feeling in a dismissive way. She didn't smile with pity. She asked, "You brought documentation," and I handed her the folder with a quiet nod. For 10 minutes, she flipped through it, my personal symptom journal, color-coded spreadsheets, emails from my previous doctor. I watched her brow knit tighter with every page. "You've been experiencing these symptoms for how long?" she asked. 5 years, I said. Dr. Richards always said it was just anxiety. Dr. Chen looked back down. He prescribed medication, I see. 7 different ones. None of them helped. She pulled out one of my charts, tracing it with her finger. This pattern here, the numbness, fatigue, muscle weakness, these should have prompted a neurological workup. Years ago. I didn't say anything. I just nodded again. Dr. Chen closed the folder slowly. "We'll run an MRI, some labs. But I can already tell you, you've been living with an undiagnosed neurological condition. And I believe I know exactly what it is." I felt everything and nothing all at once. She stood. "And with your permission, I'd also like to send a letter to your previous physician. What I'm seeing here is a clear and concerning pattern of medical dismissal. And it may be harming others." I nodded once more. For the first time in 5 years, someone had finally read me, and believed every word. 5 years ago, I would have never imagined keeping a medical journal. Back then, I was a full-time high school biology teacher, a mother to 2 growing kids, and the kind of person who powered through everything, grading papers late into the night, volunteering for PTA events, and still managing to cook dinner most nights. I was tired, yes. But what working mother wasn't? Then the fatigue changed. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was a bone-deep heaviness, the kind that made it hard to lift a coffee mug without bracing my elbow. My legs felt off. Sometimes, it was like my feet were disconnected from the rest of me. Like walking across the room took deliberate concentration. Once, while writing notes on the whiteboard, my hand just stopped cooperating. It trembled, dropped the marker. I laughed it off in front of my students. The first time I brought it up to Dr. Richards, he didn't even look up from his tablet. "Sounds like stress," he said. "You're a teacher, a mom. Women in your position are under constant pressure. Try yoga. Maybe some breathing exercises." I didn't push. He was my family doctor. He'd delivered my daughter. I trusted him. Over the next year, the symptoms multiplied. Pins and needles in my fingers. Waking up with blurred vision. Muscle spasms in my back that lasted for days. Each time I went in, I was met with the same patronizing calm. "Anxiety," he'd say. "You're not sleeping enough. You're overworked. Here, let's try a low-dose SSRI." I wanted to believe him. God, I needed to believe him. Because if he was right, it meant there was nothing seriously wrong. But somewhere deep in my chest, something tugged. This wasn't just in my head. I began to keep notes. Not out of defiance, but because I needed a pattern, something concrete to hold on to. I tracked when the numbness started. When it faded. What I'd eaten. Whether it rained that day. I built charts in Google Sheets during lunch breaks. My students joked I looked like I was planning a scientific study. I guess I was. By year 3, I stopped telling Dr. Richards everything. What was the point? He was convinced I was just another overextended woman looking for validation. He even suggested therapy for somatic symptom disorder. Told me my brain was creating the illness because I couldn't handle life. So I stopped asking him to understand. And I started preparing for the day someone else finally would. The dismissal became routine. Every time I walked into Dr. Richard's office, I already knew the script. He'd ask how I was sleeping. I'd say not great. He'd nod sympathetically and tell me that stress often manifests physically, especially in high-functioning women. Then he'd either adjust my medication or suggest I try journaling, emotional journaling, not the symptom tracking I'd quietly been building on my own. At some point, I realized I could have walked in with one leg numb and the other on fire, and he would have still written mild anxiety, recommended mindfulness. When I lost vision in my left eye for 4 hours, I panicked. I was alone in the house, the kids at school. I sat on the edge of the bed, one eye closed and the other, dark. Not black, just, gone. A strange blankness. It came back slowly, and by the time I saw him 3 days later, it was like it had never happened. He called it an ocular migraine. Common in women your age, he said. I told him I didn't have a history of migraines. He shrugged. Maybe you do now. The moment he said that, I knew something had shifted. Not just in my health, but in how little he was willing to see me anymore. It wasn't that he didn't believe I was experiencing something, it was that he had already decided what it was, and wasn't open to being wrong. Every follow-up became shorter. Every question I asked earned a patronizing smile. When I mentioned that I was tracking patterns and had seen certain triggers recur around temperature changes and hormonal shifts, he laughed lightly and said, "You should have gone to medical school." I did go to school, I wanted to snap. I teach biology. I know what the central nervous system does. I know what it doesn't do. And I knew my body was sending up red flags like a forest fire. But instead, I sat there, nodded, and took the refill. He called it health anxiety. Said it was common among women who felt like they were losing control of their lives. He told me to breathe through the sensations, to remember that our bodies mirror our minds. He never once ordered imaging. Never referred me to a specialist. Never even considered that a teacher who teaches the structure of neurons might actually notice when her own weren't working properly. I started to wonder, if I hadn't been calm, if I had cried or begged, would he have taken me more seriously? Or less? By year 5, I didn't even feel anger anymore. I felt strategy. Because while he was writing dismissive summaries, I was building a case. While he ignored every new symptom, I was organizing them by date, duration, severity. I had created a timeline that stretched across a wall in my home office. I didn't know what the endgame would be. But I knew this: one day, I would place it all in front of someone who didn't see an anxious woman, but a patient whose body had been whispering the truth for years. And when that day came, I wanted the record to speak louder than I ever could. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I asked for my full medical records. The receptionist at Dr. Richard's office looked confused, almost alarmed. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice dipping into that falsely sweet register that always made me feel small. "I'd just like a copy of my file," I said. "Complete history. Everything from the last 5 years." She glanced at the screen. "That's a lot of pages. Do you need it for a new provider?" I didn't answer that directly. "I'd like it in PDF format, emailed, and on a USB, please." She blinked. "You have a right to your records, of course, it's just, patients don't usually ask." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I'm not most patients. They said it would take 48 hours. It took 6 days. And when I received the file, all 276 pages of it, I printed out every last one and spread them across my dining room table like I was building a legal case, because, in some ways, I was. There it was, in black and white. Patient reports fatigue. No clinical findings. Symptoms inconsistent. Recommending continued SSRI treatment. Somatic tendencies suspected. Health-focused anxiety. Over and over again. Not one referral to neurology. Not one order for imaging. Nothing but notes that reduced 5 years of progressive symptoms to emotional instability. He'd never even documented the times I'd mentioned losing sensation in my limbs. Or the blurry vision. Or the episodes of imbalance that had me gripping walls like a drunk. But I had. In my own journals. In my own files. And now, I had both sides. One written by a man who assumed I wouldn't ask questions. And one written by a woman who knew exactly what questions would come next. I took a deep breath, pulled up the website for Boston Medical Center, and searched the neurology department. Autoimmune specialist. Experience with female-presenting neurological conditions. Research background. Compassionate patient reviews. Dr. Melissa Chen. I clicked Request Appointment. And as I attached my documentation and clicked Send, I didn't feel fear. I felt like the truth was finally in motion. The morning of my appointment with Dr. Chen, I woke up before my alarm. Not because I was nervous, but because for the first time in years, I felt like this might actually matter. Like someone might finally look, really look, and not see a fragile woman with health anxiety, but a patient with a body crying out for help. I brought everything. A folder with my full medical records. A second binder with my own documentation, daily symptom logs, monthly trend charts, correlations between flare-ups and temperature, stress, sleep. Notes I'd made in the margins of neurology textbooks I'd borrowed from the library. I didn't want to overwhelm her. I just wanted her to see what I'd been forced to carry alone. She greeted me with a firm handshake, direct eye contact, and no clipboard between us. Already, I felt more seen than I had in 5 years. I reviewed your intake file, she said. And I'd like to start with your own documentation, if that's okay. It wasn't just okay. It was the first time anyone had asked. She flipped through my charts, pausing at the hand-drawn nerve diagrams, the highlighted notations, the timeline I had taped together from 3 legal-sized pages. She nodded slowly. These symptoms follow a clear central nervous system pattern. The numbness, the fatigue, the motor weakness, they're all consistent with demyelinating activity. Did Dr. Richards ever refer you for an MRI? I shook my head. Any blood work? Lumbar puncture? No. He said it was stress. She frowned. This should have been investigated years ago. Her examination was thorough. Reflex tests. Eye tracking. Gait analysis. She listened carefully when I spoke, and asked questions that felt pointed, purposeful, not perfunctory. When she was done, she leaned back, her expression serious but calm. I won't make an official diagnosis until we've completed imaging and labs, she said. But based on what I'm seeing, both clinically and in your records, I suspect you're living with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. The room tilted. Not from shock. From relief. It had a name. It had always had a name. She explained the next steps: MRI scheduling, blood work, referral to the MS center, possible steroid treatment options. But what stayed with me wasn't the plan. It was what she said just before I left. With your permission, I'd like to send a formal letter to Dr. Richards. Your documentation, and his failure to act on it, represent a pattern of clinical negligence. And this may not be the only time it's happened. I didn't hesitate. Yes. Please. Later that afternoon, I sat at home with a heating pad on my lower back and opened the binder again. I flipped past charts, annotations, printed screenshots. All the things I'd once made just to feel less invisible. Now they were evidence. Not just for me, but for every woman who had been told to breathe through her symptoms. To smile. To relax. To stop making such a big deal. Dr. Chen saw me. And now, others would have to see, too. The letter went out within the week. It was addressed to Dr. Richards' office but also CC'd to the hospital's Internal Review Board and the Massachusetts Board of Medicine. Dr. Chen didn't mince words. Her language was clinical, professional, and devastatingly precise. She cited dates. Symptoms. Missed diagnostic opportunities. She highlighted repeated documentation of psychosomatic tendencies in place of neurological assessments. She listed what should have happened, what didn't, and what the consequences might be if such a pattern was found in other patients' charts. I didn't need to embellish anything. The truth stood tall on its own. 2 months later, I received a formal acknowledgement from the medical board confirming that an investigation had been opened. At first, I didn't expect much. These things can be slow, buried under bureaucracy. But then something unexpected happened. I got a call. Not from Dr. Richards. Not from his staff. From a woman named Lisa Myers. She introduced herself as an attorney representing another patient, a woman with nearly identical symptoms and nearly identical notes in her file. "Your name came up," she said. "Your complaint triggered a broader review. There were others. Several others." My voice caught in my throat. They had also been told it was just stress. That it was a phase. That women your age experience a lot of diffuse symptoms. They had been given sleeping pills. Anti-anxiety meds. Some had stopped going to doctors altogether. But my records, my color-coded charts, the day-by-day timeline, were different. They couldn't brush it aside, Lisa told me. Your documentation gave us something they couldn't ignore. 4 months after that, I received another letter. This one from the Board of Registration in Medicine. It stated that Dr. Richards had been placed under review, required to complete a multi-week retraining in women's neurological care, and would practice under supervision for a minimum of 12 months. Additional complaints had been formally sustained. He wasn't suspended. He wasn't stripped of his license. But for the first time, he would no longer be able to see a patient like me and call her dramatic. Call her hormonal. Call her anxious. He would have to look again. Listen again. Or he'd lose everything. And maybe that's not revenge. But it's a start. It's been a year since Dr. Chen said the words I had waited 5 years to hear. A year of treatment, of learning to adjust. Some days, my legs still buzz with static, and my hands ache like they've held too much. But I'm no longer afraid of what's happening to me. I know its name now. And more importantly, I know it was never just in my head. The diagnosis didn't fix everything, but it gave me back something I hadn't realized I'd lost, my authority. Over my body. Over my story. I started a support group not long after the medical board closed its investigation. We meet twice a month, in a borrowed room at the community center, women of all ages with notebooks and folders just like mine. Some bring spreadsheets. Others bring nothing but a memory they can't shake, and I roll from a doctor, a hand waved in dismissal, a medication they never wanted. We sit in a circle and swap stories, not to dwell in the pain, but to sharpen the tools. I teach them how to document, how to track patterns, how to request records, how to phrase questions so they don't get brushed aside. We role-play appointments. We read medical policy. We write timelines on whiteboards. We prepare for the next room, the next office, the next gatekeeper. One woman, a mother of 3, pulled me aside after a meeting. "I thought I was crazy," she whispered. "Until I saw how you tracked everything. I started doing the same. Turns out I have lupus. My doctor missed it for 2 years." We hugged. Quietly. Fiercely. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. About teaching other women what I wish someone had told me 5 years ago. You don't have to sound angry to be taken seriously. You don't have to explain your pain for it to be real. And you are allowed, entitled, even, to be both patient and prepared. I walk slower now. I sit more often. I cancel when I need to. But I carry myself differently. Because I know now, the system doesn't listen to emotion. It listens to evidence. And sometimes, the most powerful thing a woman can do is keep a record no one thought she'd need. Until the day it speaks for itself. And that's how I learned that silence isn't weakness. It's strategy, when used by someone who's prepared. Has someone tried to dismiss your pain or your voice? Tell your story in the comments. Like this story? You're welcome to stay for the next one. And if you know someone who's ever been told it's just anxiety, share this with them. They might need to be reminded they're not imagining it.